Hi folks, you're listening to the Paranormal Peep Show with myself, Andy Chaplin, and our fantastic host, Neil Geddes-Ward. Neil, how have you been in lockdown?
Even more fantastic, I guess. I've been fantastically busy. It's a really strange thing that I find in myself with so many different projects, and I wish I had about 10 pairs of hands to juggle them. So I am kind of, really, really busy, but in a way that I can really enjoy being busy, because I hate not being able to do stuff. So I'm actually getting my head around into lots of projects and things, which the lockdown, in a way, I'm kind of grateful for it in a way, but I know it's not good for a lot of people. I can understand that as well. How are you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in a similar situation. So my big thing at the moment is website coding. So my head is just full of code. It's nice to have a bit of a break, actually, and do the show. And playing chess as well. I've downloaded a chess app, and a few of my mates are into chess. And it's interesting because you start off quite rusty. So I don't know if you're into chess, Neil, but you start off quite rusty. But the more you play it, the more you kind of get your head around it, and then it gets quite fun, actually.
You're retraining those neurons that you kind of let go rusty all those years at school and that. Yeah, because I used to be in a chess club myself years ago at school.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I know the rough thing of it, but yeah, you'll probably beat me hands down, I'm sure.
I think it also it helps with other things as well. So chess is obviously very rational, it's very logical, and so is coding and websiting. So, they go hand in hand. And I really do think that people decline in their older years because they're not using their brains enough. And I think if people kept their brains going, I think you'd see a lot less Alzheimer's and degeneration and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Now I'm wondering if the first signs of Alzheimer's actually come into sort of around our age now, like just being silly and a bit forgetful. Well, what's the name of that bloke I spoke to? And you actually start, is this the first sign of something? And in 30 years' time, it will really go downhill. So I'm going to start reading chess books, I think, just to kind of keep you ticking over. But you've been playing, I understand you've been playing because I was invited to actually join you guys online. And I just said, sorry, I really haven't got the time. Forget his name now. Oh, God.
James, wasn't it?
James, that's it. James. Yeah.
I've been playing him a few times. He almost beat me the first time. He was swept in quite strongly with a bishop and a queen. But since then, I've luckily managed to kind of trounce him a little bit. So we'll have to have a rematch.
Well, that's it. You see, I taught my kids to play chess about 10 years ago. And of course, I beat them. But after about 3 or 4 games, they really sussed it. And then now I struggle trying to beat them. It's quite amazing. But as I was teaching my partner how to do chess, because she's got a fantastic chess set. And about 2 years ago, I said, come on, I'll teach you how to play chess. So we set up this fantastic kind of Lord of the Rings type chess set or something. It was really nice little images. And I beat her. And she said, oh, I hate that. I said, but the thing is, you've got to learn to lose in order to be able to learn to win. Because if you don't know why you're losing, how can you ever learn to win and overcome it, you see? So you've got to lose a few games to then, work out the strategy of you're thinking ahead. I know where he's going to go with that piece or something, you see. Yeah. So you're right.
This is why this actually helps with websiting, because I actually have a graphic design background. I don't have a computer technology or IT background. So I'm arty-farty creative, trying to learn how to code logically. And weirdly, chess, you have to kind of think several moves ahead. And with coding, you have to think about several different things going on at the same time with JavaScript and CSS and all that kind of gubbins. So yeah.
So you dreaming of weird numbers floating through your head like the Matrix titles?
Well, I'll tell you what, I have dreamt of chess games because sometimes I'll play kind of 3 or 4 games straight in an evening, just kind of sat back on the sofa with my mobile and just playing chess, watching BBC News. So yeah, I've had some dreams where I'm playing chess and I've woken up and it's just like, that's almost about to finish a move then, and it doesn't exist.
That's interesting because it's like chess is a very conscious thinking mind game, isn't it? But there it is being represented in the subconscious of your dreams. It's like your subconscious has grabbed it and is representing it to you. It's like, oh, what's going on there then? Why is it giving me that? That's a bit strange.
I've also found dreams do that in other ways as well. So early morning, there was a drill going off outside, someone with a pneumatic drill. And I can't remember how it was incorporated in my dream, but it got incorporated. And a few years ago, when I had a lot of muscle pains and joint pains, I had something called Palindromic Rheumatism, which is horrendous. Now gone, thankfully. But when I was getting pains, I used to dream of wasps attacking or dogs biting. And then I'd wake up and I'd be in severe pain. So it's obviously my mind kind of interpreting pain and kind of almost giving a reason for it or what it thinks is a reason within a dream state. Very strange.
So it all comes down to skills of interpretation and what it means and how the brain or the mind is processing it, which segues quite nicely into our guest, who's someone who presumably would have to work of interpretation of phenomena. Paranormal phenomena, of course. And that's the thing with paranormal investigators. We're all having to try and interpret things that you might encounter and try and wonder what it is. So without further ado, then, if I can introduce us to Kate Ray. Are you there, Kate?
I am, yes. Hello, guys.
Hi, Kate. How you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Andy, how are you?
Pretty good. Pretty good.
Good.
Do you play, Kate? Do you play chess, Kate, or do you know how to play it?
I wish I did. It's one of those things that I never got around to. I was a draft player at school, champion draft player, not so much to chess standard.
So I guess as a paranormal investigator, you're encountering kind of a few more drafts than you anticipated.
Certainly do.
Yeah. So tell us about yourself, Kate. You're a paranormal investigator. You play drafts. What else?
So I have seemed to have got into with the paranormal investigation, drawing on sort of a historic passion of mine, really, and I've been sort of drawn into the Fae world with the paranormal. Seem to have been marked quite recently as a fairy expert within hauntings. Not quite sure how it came about, but that's where I seem to be at right now.
So you started off presumably going through the traditional route, going to a haunted house, listening for creaks, bumps and ghostly chains or whatever it might be, maybe recording it or trying to tune in. How does the fairy world come into that kind of thing?
Probably more easy than you'd expect. So I was going in and as I was training myself up with psychic development and sort of doing remote viewing on buildings, I was coming across these creatures that were non-human, sort of energetically. And they were showing me things that were occurring within properties that would be traditionally put down to, I don't know, demonic entities or, the sort of the badder side of ghost hauntings. And they weren't at all. And it took me a while to get my head around what these things were and start opening up to communication. And they became something that I find easier to, I suppose, psychically find within buildings. They're a lot easier for me to pick up than the spirits of the dead within buildings. And it was just happenstance, really, that came about for me.
So you're saying that you're tuning in and they're in buildings. Now, most people, when you talk about fairies, they think of, fairies at the end of the garden or in a woodland setting. Yeah. So you're actually picking them up in buildings as well?
Yeah. I mean, I can tune into them within natural settings, but they tend to be different varieties, let's say, within those settings. Within buildings that are haunted and have negative energy or something that's called sick building syndrome, you get these sort of negative Fae presence that I don't know whether yet that they are drawn to those energies in the first place and that's why they reside there, or whether they were there first and then draw in sort of negative energies from that. But there seems to be this correlation between, negative atmospheres within buildings and it is quite a regular occurrence that I'm picking this up. And it's not just me, there are other people around and about that can sort of, help me verify things that are occurring.
Because a lot of folklore, isn't it, to do with fairies, tends to be on the negative side. Because a lot of, kind of most, if you take a kind of Disney view of fairies, it's all very kind of Tinkerbell and very happy and glittery and sparkly and, nice little fluttery wings and that kind of thing. But in actual fact, correct me if I'm wrong, in English folklore, they're actually something to be avoided. There's this thing of inviting you, enticing you into the woods, and then making you go to sleep and, eating the poison apple and all that kind of thing. What's your view on kind of like whether they're positive or negative, or maybe they're a bit of both?
I think there's a full spectrum, and the way that I've encountered them in the past has been a full rainbow, really. And you have as many malevolent as benevolent, and there seems to be, an equal amount of both from my understanding. But you're right about the history. It was only recently with the Victorian era that we started seeing them in a very different way. And these, like you say about the Disney, the kind of sexualized Tinkerbelly types with the boobs hanging out and the short skirts. It's not how I see them. Let me tell you. I don't think I've ever seen one like that.
That's Baywatch Fairy. That is.
It is Baywatch Fairy. Yeah.
So
Andy, you were going to say something. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, you're saying that. So there was misidentification between kind of demonic activity and fairy-like activity. So would you be able to separate the two? Like, for instance, what would be a typical fairy type activity to do versus a demonic type activity to do?
I think the yolk and the white for me comes down to your religious background and understanding of what's going off. I've done a hell of a lot of research and thinking about sort of what demonics are and where they fall within a spectrum. And I do believe that there are certain kinds of those kind of forces which do fall within the Fae. So they do present themselves in the way that, by pinching, biting, waking people up, entering people's dreams, generally making sort of a nuisance of themselves, right into, succubus and incubus were once thought of as the Fae. These were entities that weren't separate from the Fae world. And it's like I say, it's only recently when these things have become separate. And I think that is to do with religious interpretation, to give us good warning about, I suppose, interacting with these things.
What kind of feelings do you get when you, for instance, tune in to a person that's passed over as against to a fairy being that you might be encountering in a building? Is there a difference that you can definitely say, oh yeah, I've got definitely a fae being here, or does it take a little bit of time to work that out?
Very much almost instantly. When I get a lock on a building, it's I'm a visual. I visually scan, so I can see these things, and it's kind of an instant visual recognition. And it's then sort of dig a little deeper, and then you can start having, I suppose, some kind of conversation with them or some kind of interaction with them where you can ask them why they're there, or why they're doing what they're doing. In the same way that you would communicate with those who have passed over. I actually find people who are deceased, I find them quite difficult in terms of getting straight answers out of them, but fairies are a little more straightforward in, I think they're just very honest in, you ask them a question, they're quite honest in their comeback with things.
Do you think they're a completely different species? I mean, are they even related to Earth, or do you think they're interdimensional?
I think they're interdimensional, but my feeling is that they're the first sort of dimensional layer beyond our own, so they're the closest energetic to our own being, and that's why they can traverse. And I think that for me boils down to the fact that they all have jobs within the material realm, which gives them an instant connection with our world. They all have specific tasks within our energetic world. It's just that they're not in their right material. They're not sort of solid beings. But I think the closer, the most interdimensional beings.
Haven't they been furloughed at all?
Unfortunately not, no. They don't get a break.
No. So when you say they've got jobs within this world, what kind of jobs are we talking about?
I mean, you sort of, your nature spirits are the ones that will look after natural places. I mean, we've all heard stories about places where people don't go because of the Fae, and places where that can't be built on. There's numerous cases within Ireland where roads can't be built because there's fairy trees or fairy mounds. We are absolutely steeped in the UK with stories of that going on. And part of their job is to be custodians of sacred and natural places. So I suppose they're you sort of your nicer end of the fairies. I have come across some entities within that realm that have really ancient jobs of looking after deep within the earth. They're pretty difficult to call out and communicate with. They're kind of further away from understanding human beings and our existence. So there is, like us, there is a range of jobs, but they do it because it's within their nature. They don't do it because it's a job. It's just what they do and how they exist.
Mm. Now, when you see them and you say you can spot them straight off, are they aware of you, or do you have to tune into them and they have to tune into us?
As soon as I tune in, the majority of the time they are very much aware. I think there's something when you are deliberately tuning in that your energy becomes sort of a beacon for them, so they can kind of spot you. They quite like it a lot of the time. They quite like that recognition a lot of the time. And a lot of the time when I've come across, I think the word that's being bantered around at the minute in the paranormal community is imps. That's a biggie within the community right now. I don't think they're all imps, but I think that's a good description of what I'm coming across. And basically, I recently described them as toddlers with ADHD. You know, they want attention, and if they're not going to get attention, they'll do pretty much anything to get that. So once you tune into them and you get a sort of lock on them, they're quite happy to have that interaction. Although they can still be quite naughty with you, but yeah, they're quite happy with that.
And what kind of thing, when you go there and you know you lock onto them and you're aware of what they are? And presumably, I don't know. I mean, are you just like thinking, okay, I'm going to concentrate on the fairies now. I'm going to ignore any ghosts or dead people here. I'm just going to communicate with the fairies. What sort of dialogue do you get with them? What sort of thing are they trying to tell you?
I mean, for me, what I tend to do is I will do a remote reading on a building or a specific location. I'll do a walk around where I'll just double check and verify things that I've seen and lock into any kind of energies. And then I completely close off and I go into paranormal investigator mode. So I kind of, I'm trying to get evidence. That's basically what I'm there for. So in terms of communication, it's the basic stuff that you do on ghost hunting because it's that evidential stuff that you're after. The kind of communication that I do get with them is, I would say the majority of the time I've come across 3 different reasons why Fae haunt. The first one is because in some way they feel they have been wronged. I did a case where a tree had been felled. And a house was being sort of bombarded with poltergeist type activity. And it was actually a custodian of a tree that had come into the house, and he was, you know, particularly pissed off with his family and chucking a hissy fit, really. So that's one of the reasons. Another reason that I've come across in the last few years has been sort of an ancestral thing. So it's been grandparents or great-grandparents that have done something to disrespect the Fae, and it's kind of carried on through a bloodline. And then I mentioned earlier about, you know, houses having negative energies, and they tend to attract because of that lower vibrational levels. They tend to attract these kind of entities within the house.
So when they're a bit kind of, they got an axe to grind against a family or people that have cut down their tree, how do you rectify that? Because obviously you can't bring a tree back for someone.
No, but I mean, that comes as part of the communication, and I do ask families to take part in that as well. And I mean, it's a bit of an elimination game, really, about how I don't like the word appease. I actually like the word of working with. You become aware to start off with, and it can be a whole series of the classic stuff, you know. Leaving milk and honey is a classic folklore thing, and that can be as simple as, with the tree situation, come across that a couple of times. And it has been simply, you know, getting the family to go out and plant another one, and sort of, you know, pass over that role back to that entity to try and sort of rectify that relationship. It doesn't work overnight. Sometimes it only works for a short amount of time. You have to go back to the drawing board on what to do. It depends the severity of what's occurred and how long how long things have been going on to how you rectify the situation. I am really wary, though, about giving out advice about how to do it, because the Fae don't particularly like that happening. A lot of people ask me, how do you banish them? How do you get rid of them? And that in itself can be hugely problematic. They don't like people knowing those things. They don't like human beings knowing the lots of little tricks and whatnot that you can do to get rid.
Isn't it metal or something, or like, iron or something?
It's iron, yeah, it's iron.
Yeah.
I've been trying to dig down to the history of that, and the one thing that I keep coming across, I'm going to do some more digging on it, is that iron was seen as a metal not from this world, and that's somehow connected up with the fairies not liking it. But I am going to keep digging on the sort of folklore around iron. It's interesting, though, I spoke to somebody on Friday about it, and she was saying that she'd put iron all around her apartment to try and keep what she thought was a malevolent fae away from sort of doing her any harm. And she'd actually, by doing it, trapped it inside. So she hadn't gone through the appropriate rituals to get rid of it outside her property. And this thing was particularly mad and kind of upped its game because it was now trapped. It was running around wreaking havoc. So you have got to be careful with this kind of thing.
Sounds like kryptonite to to deal with. So she thought she was protecting her property against the fairy that was already there anyway.
Yes. Yeah.
So what sort of things was it doing to sort of express the fact that it wanted to get out?
Well, she'd been dealing with this thing for quite a few years, and I'm sure she won't mind me saying, no names mentioned, but there had been a ritual that had taken place, as she described, with a Wiccan, where they'd opened up a portal and it was specifically calling in the Fae. And for years on and off, she'd had, negative interactions with this thing sort of coming in and out of her life. And quite recently, it had taken to pinching her in her sleep. So she'd wake up being pinched with sort of bruises on her. And she said that was the worst. But it was physically running around her apartment, very much like you would get in a haunting, where you can kind of hear footsteps and its peripheral vision stuff. So, I think that was pretty classic. But she'd had quite a few people verify, what it was and what was happening. And these were people who weren't related and who'd all sort of told her the same thing.
Blimey. So she got rid of it in the end then?
No, it's still there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because it was only on Friday when I told her, take the iron away. It's not done properly. So, as far as I know, I did have a chat with her about employing it to do a job, because they do get bored. So she was going to give that a try as well.
Ironmonger.
Yeah. No, she's a writer. And I think one of the things that were happening when she stopped writing, it would get particularly agitated. And I said, it obviously enjoys your energy when you're writing and enjoys that sort of interaction. So I said to her, just call it out and say, if you're gonna help me, we'll see what happens.
It just reminded me of that story. I always loved reading it. It was a Ladybird book as a kid, where it was the shoemaker and the elves story. Are you familiar with that one?
That's a long time ago. Yeah, that's a long time ago.
Yeah, that was... just the story of the guy. There was a shoemaker in some, I don't know, Victorian times or maybe even older, making shoes, and he couldn't understand why all these little shoes were being fixed or something overnight.
Yes, that rings a bell. Yeah, that rings a bell.
And so him and his wife in the story came downstairs to see what was happening in their workshop, and they could see these two little elves knocking around with sewing needles and leather and sorts of and making the shoes. So as a way of thanking them, they made these tiny little outfits for them. Mm-hmm. And then again, they spied on them like the next night in the story, and they saw the little elves trying on the clothes, all happy, and they ran off and they never came back again, which was a bit of a problem because it means their sweatshop was now shut.
Yeah.
But, thinking about it, the fact that those elves were doing a little job for people, what you're saying kind of ties in with that a little bit, the fact they want a job to do or something.
Yeah, the interesting fact about that is, and it's something that I read quite a lot, is that the fairies don't like to be thanked. that, you know, they like it's sort of suitable. I don't think payment's the right word, but, you know, that kind of honouring of them.
Respect.
But they don't, respect, yeah, definitely respect and honour, but they don't particularly like to be thanked. And you will find stories of people who have thanked them, and actually bad things have happened to them. That's
bizarre.
So, yeah, what kind of things have happened that's bad to people and that don't do this kind of thing?
In terms of my experience, it has. I'm sorry, my dog's growling here. I'm just going to have to let her out. Can you give me 2 seconds? Sorry.
Maybe she's seen a fairy.
Maybe, yeah.
Do you have any questions, Andy, whilst we're pausing?
It's just, have you ever seen a fairy, Neil?
No, I felt them.
You felt them?
Yeah, I've done readings on people, and suddenly I've tuned in and found like a small being kind of next to me. And you know when you tune into spirit, you feel something on your right or your left. Well, I was tuning in, but instead of something to my right and left and kind of feel it's just above me, I was feeling it's down below in my corner somewhere.
Okay.
And that's where I felt this is not a human energy. I felt that it was definitely a small being type of thing. And I did this reading on this guy. I said, look, I feel I've got something like a gnome or something like that. And he says, well, it's interesting you say that because a medium has told me that a gnome follows me around. So it kind of verified what I was picking up, because I was really surprised. But, you know, I'm thinking, oh, hang on, I haven't got Auntie Ethel or anything like that. It's something that's not quite on that wavelength, you know.
Well, again, the gnomes are kind of like folklore. You know, are they good? Are they bad? Are they mischievous? Are they evil? I know Simon Parkes doesn't like gnomes at all.
Why does he not like gnomes?
He says they're mischievous and they're always up to no good. Basically, they've got a bad energy about them, and he doesn't like anything gnome related.
Interesting, because as far as I understood, they live well. In fact, yeah, you get these ones that live down in tin mines and supposedly associated with Cornwall in the southwest of England, and they supposedly were warned miners of impending disasters in mines, and they'd be called knockers because they'd knock on the wood and stuff.
Yeah.
Of course, that could be the structure of the mine just creaking under the the shifting ground or something. But yeah, all these legends of tin mines with weird creatures in there and stuff like that. Kate, are you back with us?
I am, yes. Sorry about that.
Yeah, okay. So we were just talking, Andy asked if I had tuned in and picked up anything or seen a gnome or anything like that. And I was just saying I saw this gnome, or rather felt a gnome in a reading for someone. And when I was trying to do a reading, normally as clairvoyants and mediums would perhaps recognize this, when you feel the spirit around you, you can kind of feel them either to your right or your left. And when I've done that, I normally feel them to my right or left, and they're slightly just above my shoulder or above my head. But on this particular occasion, this was down in the corner of my left-hand side, and that's why I felt it was a small being. It's very, very interesting. Is that how you perceive them?
Sometimes, yeah. I generally feel that because they're energetic beings, that they don't particularly have a physical size in the sense that we do. I think that they will project and give us a clue of what kind of personality that they are. So you do get this sort of the sylph-like fairies that do sort of flutter around in the air, because that's our understanding of them. Or you would get, like you say, the gnomes that are quite short and quite stocky little things. And sometimes they do sort of give us clues to what their purpose is in the world. And I came across years ago. It was my first physical encounter, which I didn't tell anybody for about 10 years, which I saw what I now call a sod. That was down at Wayland Smithy. I was walking down the way down to Wayland Smithy from the Chalk Horse. I could hear all this kind of, I can only describe it as singing. It sounded a bit like the clangers. Lots of rustling in the bottom of the hedges. Eventually sort of made a rugby tackle for the bottom of the hedge, and after a few attempts, I actually parted the grass, and there was this thing that looked like a cross between a mouse and a very tiny man wearing tweed trousers. I mean, can you imagine how mad I must have sounded telling people this? You know, it was like one of those things that I thought I'd take to my grave. And it very much projected to me the fact that it lived in that hedgerow, and its job was to sort of keep the peace and order. I've actually recently heard that song again, and it's the first time, since I was 15 years old that I was like, oh wow, I recognise that, and that was walking around the woods this spring. So they do present in very, very different ways, and for very different reasons, I think.
So you called it a sod?
I called it a sod, yeah, because it had that kind of earthy feel, not as in you sod, as in a sod of earth. It had that real
sodden, soaky, damp, earthy, wet.
Yeah, definitely. I couldn't put it into a category for you though. I couldn't say, it was. I started off thinking, is it a gnome? But it didn't fit the gnome sort of profile. But it, because it was above ground, and it obviously was dwelling above ground, and so I didn't know really where to put it.
So you said it looked like a. I've got my dog coming up now for a cuddle. You've got rid of one. I've acquired one. Yeah. Okay. All right. Stay there, girl. So anyway, Are
there different types of fae, like different species or different kind of? Can you get small ones, big ones, medium-sized ones that fly, ones that don't fly?
Yeah, again, I think that comes down to their purpose and how we can best perceive them. I mean, another encounter that I had will kind of shed a bit of light of this onto me, where I actually saw what would be seen as a classic fairy. But it was, I know you're both aware of the work of Brian Froud, but he does a series that are fae just made of light, and they're just sort of bright, pure, brilliant white light sort of emitting in the ether. And I encountered one of these things, and it did make me think of that for me, it felt like its truest form. It felt like it was kind of coming through into our realm in not a way that it wanted to be seen. It didn't have any human attributes. So I don't know whether that occurs with them all, but I kind of get the sense that does. So we are, as human beings, we are absolutely compelled by categorizing things and sort of understanding and studying things and putting them in boxes. And I think that they appreciate that in the fact that they put themselves into boxes so that when we have interactions with them, we already have a narrative about what they are and what their purpose is. So, I mean, I've seen some, like I was saying about these earth-dwelling ones that are bigger than a house. They're absolutely huge entities. They are pretty formidable creatures. I came across 2 of those in 1 year a few years back, and they just did not want to know. They did not want to know at all. But I think that sense of foreboding was definitely put across by their size, and whether they can push their energy out and sort of give us that image is something that I haven't really got the answer to, but I'm kind of erring on the side that they do project for various reasons.
A bit like a dog, as we've got dogs in the vicinity,
Yeah.
I might as well use them as an example. When they're trying to big themselves up, all their hair stands on end so they can look much more formidable to say a cat or something. So you're saying that perhaps these creatures in a sort of defense mode will try and give a wrong impression or a bigger impression just to make you back off in some way.
Yeah, I have one of the tree encounters was when the energy was, when the spirit was looking after the tree, it very much resembled attributes of the tree. And when it was when the tree had been chopped down and it was sort of stomping around the house, it looked like a little fat thing with a hooked nose. It was really mad, really, really angry, and that's how it was projecting its anger. And I mean, I have this thing about, and I've read this in many, many accounts where people have actually caught fae mimicking human behaviour, especially when they find something amusing. So if they don't know how to project their own anger into a world in the way that we'd understand, then it's quite possible that they would mimic the sort of, the body and the intonation and the words that we use in that instance. So it's just such a movable feast. It's like Mercury. It's like you think you get hold of one aspect and it just kind of slips through your fingers and something else will sort of slide in there and you think, that's what's happening. That's what's going off with these things.
What do you think about what some people think Jacques Vallée, who was, still is, a UFO researcher, he's made what he believes is a possible connection between aliens and fairies, in the sense of that, you have missing time, you might get abducted by both of them, taken away, you lose memory of the incident, and things are maybe, you're checked over in some way. I mean, what do you think of those sorts of connections there?
I am an absolutely massive fan of cross-disciplinary work and research. I don't understand how, as paranormal investigators, that we don't get into cryptozoology, that we don't get into ufology, that we don't get into fairyology, because there are so many connectives between them all. It's just absolutely glaringly obvious. And I do believe that there are massive crossovers for whatever reason between UFO encounters, alien encounters, and the world of the Fae.
It sounds like you need to have a trip to Skinwalker Ranch.
Oh, yes, there's loads going off there, isn't there? Yeah, I think that would scare the bejesus out of me being there, to be quite fair. It's quite a weird place.
Mm.
For those that don't know, Andy, do you want to explain what Skinwalker Ranch is for those that might want to take a trip there?
Well, yeah, actually, I don't know if you're allowed to. I think it's a private property. Whether they do tours or not, I don't know. But it's in the UFO and certainly kind of psychic and paranormal world. Skinwalker Ranch in America, obviously, is a ranch. It's a working cattle ranch. But it's been an absolute hotbed of paranormal and strange activities. They've had UFO activities, men in black, helicopters, poltergeist activity, grey activity, cattle mutilations, all sorts of strangeness. And I think it was owned by the Shermans, a family called the Shermans. And then another guy took over, and he allowed a TV production company to come in. And I've forgotten what the hosts' names are, but there's about 5 or 6 of them. All very kind of typically American characteristic cowboy hats and all that kind of thing, which is fantastic. And yeah, they do a lot of investigations into what's going on there. They've been putting drones up. They're getting spikes in terms of radioactive anomalies. They had an actual cow that I don't think it got mutilated, but it died of strange causes. I don't think they could work out why it had pneumonia. So apparently this cow had pneumonia, but pneumonia is brought on apparently by stress, like high stress situations. And interestingly, they did photograph or video a UFO hovering just above the cow as it was kind of happening. Very, very strange place. And they've also done ground penetrating radar experiments as well. And apparently there's a huge dome structure under the ground as well in Skinwalker Ranch. So God knows what's going on there, whether it's a secret UFO base, military testing base, who knows. But yeah, a lot of paranormal stuff.
Sounds like a place we should all go for a nice holiday when the lockdown's over. Yeah. So
the name for Skinwalker Ranch comes from the, if I get this right, the Native American believed in these creatures that could take on shape-shifting. Yeah. And they would come in forms of human beings, or they'd come in forms of animals, etc. And they would take people away. So very much that Fae connection as well there, with a twist, if you like.
Mm.
Mm. Would that be why the name is called Skinwalker? The skin walks on changes. Maybe
yes, Yeah, I think so. Yeah, definitely.
Interesting. Now, when you mentioned these giant beings before, because most people picture as fairies these tiny little things fluttering about, or tiny gnomes and things like that, it's not often that you're told about beings of the fairy realm that as huge as houses and things like that.
Yeah.
What are they called, those ones?
I have no idea. I have tried to communicate with them, the two that I've come across. One was a guy was being sort of dream haunted, if you like, by absolutely petrifying nightmares of teeth. It was the main thing in his dream sequences, and he very much felt like there was something more to it. And when I was talking to him, it was the first time I come across one of these things, and it was a really formidable picture that I was getting. It was this massive, massive thing, and it was kind of billowing smoke. It was kind of, is it about, I'm going to get this wrong, and I'm going to be absolutely slaughtered for the Lord of the Rings fans out there. Is it the Balrog?
I don't know. Neil, this is your department.
No,
it's the
Valkyrie. No,
it's the one that, it's the big beast that Gandalf is fighting down in the
the dragon thing.
Yeah, I just call it the great big dragony thing. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So it kind of came as looking very much like that. We got to the bottom of why it may have happened, and it started occurring. He used to be an archaeologist, and he had been working on some ancient ground in this country, and he definitely saw the connection between when it had started and in his work that had taken place on that. So these things are from deep in the earth. They're not your Nomi types who sort of potter around and keep to the first sort of layers. These are, they will protect real sacred sites. I've been reading a series of books quite recently where they kind of touched on that, where quarrying sort of releases these things out into the world, and it kind of spreads darkness and death around it. If you don't, if you're not respectful to the land when you're doing that kind of thing. So interesting concept. They wouldn't communicate with me at all. Absolutely not. Just acknowledge me in a way of, don't even bother. That is the most polite way that I can put it, really. You don't want the wrath of us anywhere near you. So I kind of very quickly both times backed up.
Where was this? Both you encountered both these beings on the same research night, or was it two separate times?
Two completely separate times. One did. The second one was in a property that was investigated by other investigators afterwards. It was one of those really weird circumstances where I'd come across this couple before I knew that an investigative team was going to go in, and I go out on events with an events. Paranormal investigator with Ghost Finder Paranormal Society, and I never ever tune in on a psychic level. It gets too busy when there's lots of people around. But I couldn't help it with this couple. It's the only time when I've ever approached somebody and said, "What is going on with you guys?" And I tentatively went up to them and said, "I'm really sorry. I'm picking up loads around you. I said, have you got paranormal activity in your home?" And they were like, "Oh yeah, we've got loads." And I kind of told them what I had been shown and about this repetitive illness that was going off in the house, and the classic knockings and bangings, the poltergeist activity, and actually this being was an ancestral attachment that had sort of run down through the family, and because it was in their property and around their property, they had this what was termed as an infestation of imps, which I quite like that terminology from the other paranormal investigators. But its energy was so bass low resonating that it just kind of drawn, I think, other beings of that kind of standard towards it, and was wreaking havoc in this poor couple's home, bless them.
How did they get rid of that?
I don't know whether they have. I really don't know. It wasn't my baby to catch up on, really. It wasn't, as a follow-up. There's a few bits of correspondence with me about it because to begin with, and I handed over my information to the people who were investigating that. It was a private investigation, so they were really sweet about it, though. They were just like, "Oh, we know it happens. It's always happened," and so they were way more chilled out than I would have been in that situation. Let me tell you, because I don't think I'd have been that cool about things that were going off in the property. So they seemed all right till that stage, and it had been going off for years. So I think it was just part and parcel of the life, really.
Are there people that professionally go around and clear fairies, or kind of like what's the word? Pacify.
Cleanse the house.
Pacify them, placate them.
I in the cleanse sense, I hope not. Clear them, I hope not. I think both those things. I've seen people try to deal with the fae in the way that they would demonics, and seeing it, at the best they get laughed at the worst it ups activity. The Fae don't really understand so much what's going off, and just see it as a massively disrespectful thing to do to them. It's a tricky one. I'll tell you a little bit of a story. I was writing an article for a magazine about Fae haunting. Not been published, not been out there, because I got to the end of it and I did the last few paragraphs on simple ways that you could banish them, and I got a real sharp shock across the bow, and if the incident hadn't have happened in front of witnesses, I don't think I would ever have believed that it actually happened to me. And so I was stood outside talking to a few friends. I felt and heard like I was being rushed from behind. It was through a thicket of trees, so I heard sort of cracking of leaves and branches, and it felt like I had. I sound like a nutter, even more of a nutter when I'm telling this one, and it felt like a bird had got stuck in my hair and was flapping its wings on my head, and then the next thing I know, I was spitting out soil and bits of grit. And like I say, if it happened on my own, I would never ever tell anybody that tale. But there was, I think, 6 or 7 other people stood round who all heard it and saw, me spitting out soil, which is just. And I do very much believe that was a shot across the bows, because it was the afternoon when I'd finished that article, and I think it was like, oh no, you don't, You don't put that out into the world. So I didn't. I went home and went, I'm not doing it.
But you're telling us now. So.
I am telling you now. I am telling you now. But I think I think that warning wasn't just a warning for me. I think it's a warning for other people, that I think for a long, long time we have forgotten the Fae, and we've forgotten how to be with them. And I do think that part of my sort of paranormal journey is definitely to remember how to be with them, how to live with them, and how to work with them. And I do find it incredibly important, not just in terms of a lot of people who work with Fae do it in an environmental way, but in all kinds of different ways. I mean, there's loads of research out there about the Fae work in terms of alchemy and witchcraft and being sort of familiars for witches. And it's, all these beings I feel quite sorry for, because they're kind of cast aside, never to be worked with again. And it'd be nice to revisit that as in the human realm to understand them again.
Now, in my research into the Fae, some of the stuff suggests that they were thought to be once up there with the gods, in quotes, and they're like fallen gods as such. I mean, is that something that you agree with, or you've heard of at least? Yeah,
I've definitely heard of it. And for me, it very much fits in with my ideas through research with that and the paranormal, that the angelics are part of that realm as well. You have those two extremes, and it's again, it's pretty hard, because it's quite an emotive subject, especially for those who have religious beliefs, to understand that. I'm quite comfortable with the terminology of angels, but I believe that they're sort of the kind of the overarching glory of the Fae, really. Whether you want to call them divas, whether you want to call them angelics, or whether you want to call them lesser gods. For me, it's all about, the end of the day, it's about energy levels, and that's the kind of the top of the tree for pure energy, if you like, and brilliant energy. And for me, that's how it fits in with the kind of concepts of heaven and fallen gods. But yeah, I'm not averse to that theory at all.
And so in the scheme of things, where you mentioned earlier, the Fae are just a kind of in the next sort of layer of reality to us, close to the earth, but they come back and they interact with the earth as well, like they dip in and out of it. Why do you think they feel a sense of responsibility to the earth? I mean, I would have thought, maybe it's just my thinking, that once you've left the earth, there's no real responsibility that you've got with it, because you're in the next level anyway.
I don't think that they've left the Earth. I think they're just the other side of a net curtain, if you like. And I think it's for me the most logical thing is they have a symbiotic relationship with the natural world that we live in one way or another, and they get as much out of it as the things that they attend to. So they get an energetic exchange. Say, let's go for a flower fairy, because that's the analogy that always sticks in my head. You've got a fairy looking after a plot of pansies, and it gets just as much energy back from that plant as it does from protecting it and nurturing it and appreciating it. And for me, I really like that sort of theory about why they kind of interact and why they kind of cross over in and out. And I think that our world is their world, and I think their world can be our world too, but we're just so utterly shut down to that kind of thinking, because it's not logical within our world anymore.
Have you ever heard of dryads as well?
Yes, I have heard of dryads. Yeah.
I've got an interesting story if you want to hear it.
Oh, I'd love to.
Got, about 5 or 6 minutes before the break, so might as well sort of roll on with this one. About 20 plus years ago, maybe even longer, I was involved in a book because I'm an artist and I paint pictures, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
So this guy, I won't mention his name, who was getting all these artists to do these books on trees, different sorts of trees. He asked each artist to paint their favorite tree, and he was going to write a book about how to work with the trees on a spiritual kind of level. Mm-hmm. And each part of the book would be accompanied by one of our artists' drawings or paintings. So I got to know him and things like that, and I'd go around on these little walks with the author around the trees, and he'd show me all the trees, because I don't really know much about trees myself. But he told me a very interesting story. He said that he had gone on like a workshop or weekend thing somewhere where he met other people, and it's to do with trees and meditations and stuff like that. And there's a guy there from Canada, and he seemed quite, although it was a tree thing, he seemed quite level-headed and down to earth and stuff like that. And he got friendly with him. He was talking to him, and he said that he used to go and meditate by his favorite tree every day. I don't know what sort of tree it was. I'll say it's an oak tree, just because that's the only tree I really know. Mm-hmm. And he would sit there and meditate by this oak tree every day. And then one day he couldn't get to this favorite tree to meditate because he was busy, and he was at work somewhere. So whilst he was at work, he felt this nagging feeling that something wasn't right, and he had to literally say to his boss, "Look, I've got to go. I've got some sort of emergency somewhere. Mm-hmm. I've got to go somewhere." And he just downed his tools and drove all the way back, and he felt drawn to go to his favorite tree that he meditated by. And he went back there, and there was his tree sawn down to nothing. It had been chopped down, and he felt drawn to go back there. But where the stump was, he said he saw this kind of luminous form, if you like, hovering above it, and it telepathically communicated with him to say, "Thank you for coming back. I just wanted to thank you for your friendship, for being my friend all this time, but I've got to go now." Wow. And it conveyed that to him. And then this luminous form, the dryad, I presume, which is a spirit of a tree in some people's thinking, then vanished and went away. And that was the end of that, basically. So, and I'd never heard of this at the time. And then Pocahontas, the Disney movie, came out, and they featured something like that, a spirit tree talking to this guy in the cartoon film. And I thought, that's reminiscent of that story I heard. So, yeah, dryad. So, and I did read some years later in a channeled book by the entity Seth. Regular listeners might know me talking about Seth and Jane Roberts. And in here, he said that trees have this consciousness, which is obviously very different from humans, but they are living entities of sorts. He says that if you walk past a tree every day, and it's the same tree, like on your way to work or school or whatever, it learns to recognize your energy. It learns to recognize your form as you go past it. It knows your irregular face. Like in the same way you might look out your window and see that same person go on down the street to, go a certain route to work or something, you would recognize the face. It will recognize you. It may not recognize the face, but it can recognize your level of energy in some way, which I thought was interesting. So, so maybe these fae beings, when they're working with nature and trees and things like that, they're not actually working with the physical tree. They could be working with the spirit of the tree. It's just 2 cents worth there.
Yeah.
Hence people tree hugging to kind of like get the energy of the earth and, the energy of the tree.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah. I mean, trees have many medicinal properties in them anyway. In the barks, there's bark flower remedies and stuff like that.
Aspirin comes from willow, I think, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's right. So, yeah. And how do we thank them? We chop them down. Like we are really on the low scale of evolution. We should not have made it this far. We really shouldn't. We are terrible, We think we're the custodians of the earth, and we're spiritual
retards. The human race is spiritually retarded.
Yeah. I mean, no wonder all these fairies are up in arms about us moving their rocks and things like that, because they were here before us, and you get these great big hominid apes that shave themselves, and all hell's let loose, Anyway, we're drawing to a close here on part one of the show. So we're talking to Kate Ray about fairies or the Fae. Is that the correct way? We should say it the Fae rather than the fairies, Kate?
I don't know. I don't think they actually mind.
Or even elementals. And the other ones I hear is divas, nature divas or nature elementals, things like that. So, so we're talking about that. We did touch about this in a previous show about fairies and that kind of connection in our last month's show. So I thought it's really nice to expand upon it and go in a bit more detail. Hence us grabbing Kate, who's an expert in this more than Andy and I. So join us for part two on the Paranormal Peep Show on the Paranormal UK Radio. And we're going to get more into Tinkerbell stuff. So get your magic wands and tutus ready, and we'll see you in a minute.
See you later.
This is Barry Fitzgerald from Ghost Hunters International. In my book, In the Mist of Gods, I explore the world of the fairies or fae. This is not the whimsical winged creatures romanticized in modern literature and popular culture, but old-world, intelligent, and sometimes dangerous beings hidden in the tunnels, mounds, and raths in countries all over the world. Known by many names, the Fae coexist with mankind and at times come in direct contact with unsuspecting people whose lives are changed forever. In the Mist of Gods is a powerful book that chronicles my years of research into the enigma and legend of the fairy and examines their metamorphosis into the modern-day extraterrestrial phenomenon. In the Mist of Gods is available in both softcover and Kindle format on Amazon and on glenandtea.com.
Oh, come in. Sit down, relax, and enjoy the show.
Well, welcome back to the Paranormal Peep Show, where we're talking on the theme of fairies. And so I just talked about in part one there the dryad experience, which is a tree spirit, which is an unusual thing in itself to have. Kate, is there any other kind of spirits that we're unaware of that might be like similar things that are out there? I mean, we talk about the fairies. Is there, some people talk about spirits of rocks and things like that. Are you aware of anything like that?
I was actually just going to say about rock spirits. That was the first thing that sprang to mind after dryads. I think what I find interesting is that dryads are very much connected to a tree. For me, on an internal level, they sort of reside within that tree, and you also get spirits that kind of have a way of protecting the tree that are around the tree, which tend to form a slightly different energy to the spirit of a tree or a rock or even the land. I just think that it's such there's such a vast plethora of different energies, and I think anything that's natural, anything that's living, anything that's kind of part of the earth does have some kind of spirit attached to it, and has spirits around it as well that make it sort of have a relationship with the spirit and with the thing.
Do you think there's a disproportionate amount of hauntings in America? Because I say that because America's a fairly new country, really, in kind of in terms of its civilization growing. I mean, we've got castles in England dating back, hundreds of years, whereas America's got quite new buildings, and yet they've got quite a lot of hauntings going on, and quite a lot of hauntings even on new properties. So do you think that there's some kind of maybe Native American link with either getting fairy folk to guard land? Because I know that especially it's the what is it? It's the stereotype of the land being, or the house being built on the Native American burial grounds, and then you get all the poltergeist activity and the demonic activity because of that. Do you think it's because fairy folk were requested to guard these properties, or do you think there's a connection between American fairy folk?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a massive subject, and would take us hours to really get to the bottom of. I think part of it is is in my mind, it's a religious connection. So when people die and they pass into spirit world, if they pass with guilt or unease within this world, then they don't seem to pick up a trajectory to be able to successfully move on. I mean, you guys know this. And I think that comes with religion as well. So when people have a very clear idea of what's right and what's wrong within a religious context on point of death, if they're unhappy with how they've lived their lives. And I think that, we often in paranormal communities talk about why there isn't as many modern ghosts. And we do see ghosts within a period setting or come across from periods gone by. And I do think that there's a connection with, heights in religious practice and worshipping. I do think that there is also a connection with those native people, no matter where they're from, whether America or all over the world, that have that very easy connection with the spirits of the land, and that they can see that there is wrongdoing. That we mentioned it in the first half. That we are these sort of I like to use the term long pigs who sort of bumble around and take what we want from the land. And we don't live in this harmony with our natural surroundings, and thus that is going to heighten that situation, definitely. But it's an absolutely massive topic, with lots of cross links in there.
Have you seen that film, The Fairy Faith, by John Walker at all, Kate?
I have, many years ago. Yeah, I've got it on the DVD somewhere stashed away.
Yeah, I bought it on DVD. Must have been about 20 plus years ago.
Yes,
now.
yeah.
I'm using a couple of those accounts in there in my forthcoming book, which fascinating accounts of the various things. I have talked about them on the show before, but it's interesting though that they go from one place like Canada, where they have encounter by a lakeside. And there's also talk about fairies braiding the horse's hair, if I recollect correctly. And then they go to Ireland, which is very traditional for fairy things. Why do you think that certain countries seem to stand out more with a kind of fairy kind of tradition? For instance, if you talk about Spain or Portugal, you don't really hear anything fey-like there, not that I'm aware of anyway. But as soon as you mention Ireland, everyone thinks, the fairies, Why do you think that is? It seems to be more prevalent in some countries than others.
I think, again, it's a massive topic, but I think there is cultural norms that definitely take place in that. And I don't think that these countries are devoid of them. I think what happens is that people genuinely, especially from rural areas, don't talk about it. Or it could be that those stories haven't filtered down into modern culture in a particularly easy fashion. So people don't recognise them. I don't think they're devoid of fairy activity, and it's something that I've considered no matter where I've gone in the world. Particularly what captivated me was I spent a lot of time to and fro into Tunisia a few years ago, and the landscape absolutely lends itself to fae. And I picked up while I was over there the sort of dryads of olive trees. These really ancient beings that were very, very sleepy, living in olive trees. But I think if you generally talk to people, if you approach people in the right way, they will tell you stories. I did a project a few years ago. I'm originally from Sherwood Forest, from Nottinghamshire, sort of the village there. And I walked every day in the woods. And I had a little bit of an art project where I'd make tiny little fairy figures, place them up in trees, but only where adults could find them. So my my aim was to get adults playing again. And I would put little notes in these fairies saying, you know, if you find me, move me, and, you know, and play, take me home if you want to take me home. And as part of that project, I was actually tracking conversations that I had with people. And I kept bumping into this guy who was in his late 50s, early 60s, and it transpired that he was an ex-fireman. And I was really kind of scared to approach him and ask him about the subject. But one day I sort of, you know, decided that today was the day. And I just said to him, you know, I know it's a funny question, but is there anywhere in the woods that you don't like to go? And he straight away said, yeah, there's places in these woods that I don't go. And without me even prompting him, he said, there's some really negative energies. And that wasn't a line I expected out of this guy's mouth. So I think, you know, those people who have, you know, if you have an encounter with a ghost, you know, people tend to go, oh, okay, you've had an encounter with a ghost. If you've seen a UFO, people tend to go, that's a bit strange. You say to people that you've had an encounter with a fairy and they look like they want to lock you up. It's not something that people are comfortable in sort of telling their stories and coming out to the world about. It's still seen as, you know, loony bin stuff, really, which I think really attributes to it. And if you've got a culture that's, you know, not forthcoming about talking about such weird things, you know, we're very open sort of in Britain and in America about talking about oddities. But there's lots of cultures that aren't, you know, and a lot of countries as well would see it sinful against God to talk about such things.
Yeah, but it would seem to rile against their religion. And interestingly, he talked about different cultures. And I met a guy on a plane, EasyJet plane. I was flying to Spain, and this would be about 15 years ago now, and I was going there with my family, and this guy got on the plane, and I thought he was Spanish, but it turns out he said, oh, I'm from Iran. He said, I prefer to call it Persia. That's the original name for it, but, you know, you can call it Iran because that's how you might know it. And I said, oh, will you go there for a holiday? He goes, oh, no, I'm an architect. I'm going out there to check on properties that I've been developing and things. So he said, what do you do? And I said, well, and at the time he ran a gallery in the Orkney Islands. So I said, I run this art gallery in the Orkney Islands. It's to do with fairies. And I showed him some artwork on my camera. And I started talking about fairy encounters. I even talked about the Fairy Faith DVD. And talked about the fairy that was cutting the shadow away from the man's feet that was featured in that film. And I said, I think there's a lot more to this world than we admit. And I think scientists are just getting their hand on the door handle of this world, but they haven't quite opened the door yet, but we're just about getting there. And he said, yes, I agree. I agree totally. And then he sort of broke his kind of unwritten rule of not to tell anybody this, but he confided in me. And he said, when I was in Iran or Persia, I was conscripted into the army, and I would put this maybe in about the 1980s, but I really wasn't sure of the year, you know, going by his age and stuff. I think he was late 40s at the time, possibly, maybe 50-ish. And he said that he was conscripted into the army, and him and this army buddy had to patrol the streets of Iran during the night with their guns, just two of them. And he said a sandstorm kicked up, so they both sought shelter and went into this mosque. And as is the custom of mosques, they both took their shoes off and their socks. And he said to, and I'll call this guy Hussein, he said to his buddy, you sit there and lay down, and I'll sit next to you, and I'll keep an eye out if there's any trouble. But you go to sleep, and then in an hour, I'll wake you up, and you can keep an eye out, and I'll have a sleep. And that's the plan for the whole night. So this guy fell asleep, and Hussein had his gun with him, and he said no matter how hard he tried to stay awake, he kept nodding off, and he kept waking up thinking, I must stay awake, and then he kept nodding off again, and he goes, I must stay awake, and he kept waking himself up. And he said it happened on the third time. He woke up, and he was surprised to see that there was a lady crouching down looking at his feet, very intently looking at his feet. And there was a 12-year-old girl next to this lady looking at his army buddy's feet very intently. And he thought, where the hell have they come from? I didn't hear anyone come in. So he said he started pressing with his elbow on the guy's chest, that's his army buddy's chest, to try and wake him up. And he wouldn't wake up. And he thought, I don't like the feeling of this. I'm going to get out of here. So he said he started to wrap the strap of the gun around his arm. Mm-hmm. So he said he wouldn't swing as he ran away. Even though he was the guy with the gun, he was the guy that was going to run away. That was the funny thing I found quite amusing. and then at that point, he said, as he was doing that, it must have caught the eye of this woman, because she suddenly looked up at him, and he said that she looked at me in the eye. And as soon as she looked at me in the eye, I just knew without a doubt she was not of this world. So it just clicked, and I knew she wasn't of this world. And he said the young girl that was with this woman also stood up. They both stood up, and they turned and walked away. And he said as they walked away, he said he noticed they both had cloven-hooved feet, and they vanished into the wall of the mosque. And when he told me that, a shiver went down my spine. I thought, oh, my God. And I thought about it, and I thought, well, bloody hell, that's amazing, because you can see that's why they were staring at their feet intently, because to them, whatever they were fascinated by the human feet, because to them, that was the oddity. Whereas to us, their cloven-hooved feet is the oddity. But then you think about it even but more, and you think, well, maybe this is where all these legends of half man, half beasts come from, or fawns and pans and things like that. And so, and this was in Iran, in a mosque.
Yeah. I thought you were actually going to go down the lines of jinn then with that story. I've been recently reading. I developed temporal lobe epilepsy a few years back. It's an absolutely fascinating thing that happens. It's not a full body, it's just your brain, and it kind of puts you into a state that was believed throughout history to be an ultimate connection with God. I was reading a paper that was a research paper that was taking place I can't remember which Arab country it was, and it was a recent thing where they went into universities and asked medical students about epilepsy in general, but particularly with temporal lobe and what they connected it to. And they could all cite what the medical condition was and how it occurred. But they all said at the end of it, pretty much it was a really high percentage, something like 86% of them said that they believed it was jinn-induced, that it came from the Fae that was inducing this, and specifically epilepsy, that it was induced by the Fae. So there is that there, and I think it's how you approach talking to people and what angle you take it from, that people will start sort of sharing stories and sharing folklore. But I just don't think, if you go in feet first and say, do you believe in fairies? The majority of British people who don't know. So it's being culturally aware of who you're asking and how you're asking.
Now, Andy, Simon Parkes talks about the jinn quite a lot, doesn't he?
Yeah, I was going to ask Kate, do you think there's a difference between the jinn and the fae? Or in fact, do you think in other cultures there are fae descriptions that they would label as something else, but you think might actually be fae yourself?
For me, fae just means the other. It just means another world. It includes a lot of things. In my mind, and I'm going to get absolutely shot down for this, there are lots of things that are cited as fae that in my mind aren't. Mermaids, for instance, are one of them. I class them as creatures as opposed to from fae realm. And I am going to get shot down. I'm sorry, fairy world, for human fairy world for saying that. But yeah, I think what happens is, as we get animals that are very, very much linked with different continents, we get fae that are very much based in different areas. So you'll get different descriptors of what these beings are. And I think jinn definitely are. And these are beings from reading, obviously, I've not really encountered any, or can be helpful or not. It depends how you interact with them, but they're particularly powerful beings and very, very ancient beings. I think that they probably are more attached to the material world from what I've read, though, and spend a lot of time within three-dimensional realm as they do within the Fae realm.
So when people think of fairies, they tend to think of tiny little people in general. That's like the commonplace folk that think of that. But you described this sod in part one.
I did.
As almost like a mouse, but with man-like features. Was that right?
It is, yeah, that's the one.
Yeah. So would you say that in the same way that you talked about those larger creatures projecting a bigger image, perhaps as a defense mechanism, do you think maybe this sod was projecting a human aspect in a sense of way of communicating with you? Or do you think it was just something that's the way it looked regardless of your interpretation?
I think, regardless of my interpretation, that particular encounter, that was how it saw itself, because I caught it out. It wasn't there willing, it didn't jump out at me and or scuttle across the road and was aware that I was there. I think that's how it thought himself. Himself. I think in terms of little sort of sylph. The classic fairy that we understand. I think there are a lot of people out there that are very blessed to be able to work with and to be able to see either psychically or actually the I would say the lighter, more positive side of fairies. And if you think about the jobs that they do, we very much get the flower fairy again springs to mind. And I think that they're the most prevalent if you've got a back garden or you're out in nature, because there are billions of flowers, so you're going to get sort of billions of these things fluttering around. So most encounters are these sort of little nice energetic beings, really, that have these little roles where they're flitting around in the natural environment. Like I say, I've only ever had one encounter with that sylph-like character, but I think my role has definitely been defined for me. That I try and find. I tell you what it is. I feel like the job centre for cast out fae. That's what I feel like, that I'm kind of coming across them because I'm trying to educate people that they do need some kind of positive interaction and jobs. And I'm quite sympathetic towards them. So maybe I should relabel myself that. What are they called in the job centre? Job centre worker for fairies.
Facilitator or something.
Yeah, that would be good.
Facilitator, yeah.
Yeah.
So these creatures, they're sort of perhaps helping trees, plants, that sort of thing. Nature, they're supporting nature in some way.
Yeah.
Is that because ultimately they're trying to support us, or are we just a pain in their butt?
I think for the majority of the time, they're quite happy just going around the business, and they don't really recognise us unless we are consciously working with them or against them. I don't think they do it for us. I think they see us as part of the natural ebb and flow of things, whether we're doing right or wrong. They're definitely more attracted to those of us who are, trying to work towards a better way of living and a more natural way of living. I think that they would be more willing to communicate and to work with us. I think they just see us as all merging into the natural web of things, really.
Do you think that the kind of Norwegian and Icelandic trolls are the same things as fae, or are they kind of?
Yeah, I definitely think they're in the fae family. It's I really do want to do a lot of reading about that. It's not something that I've kind of really focused on because of my own experiences, sort of the UK and sort of, for want of a better word, flitted around other sort of cultures. But the sort of Scandinavian countries have a really beautiful relationship with their fae. Very much believe it, and it doesn't faze them really that they put little houses out for spirits of the land to sort of live in, and they think absolutely nothing of it. And I really do genuinely like that about those sort of Scandinavian cultures.
It's very much matter of fact for them, in the same way that gin is very matter of fact for the Middle Eastern people. Definitely.
Yeah, I can imagine those lands holding trolls and things and all kinds of ancient beings.
Well, I do know for a fact that obviously the Norwegians, as Vikings, came over to Britain and, well, parts of Scotland, and they also went over to places like the Shetland Islands and also to Iceland. Now, Iceland's got a very kind of strong belief in elemental and fairy things, and I know for a fact that they did have a situation some years back where the local council of Reykjavik, I presume that's the capital of Iceland, was trying to construct a road through this particular part of Iceland, And the locals said you can't do that because you'll be cutting through a certain rock or a structure or something like that. And they said that's inhabited by the XYZ fairy or whatever it would be out there. And it'll bring bad luck. And apparently they had like a big kind of signatory thing, protest that we will oppose the council completely. And so eventually the council backed down and they had to restructure the road to move away from this particular rock, which was inhabited by the said troll or wherever it may have been. So,
I remember that story. That was a few years ago. It was elves. And I think it was there were hills that they wanted to go through. They took the road many miles out of its way to go around it. And I remember reading that and thinking, that's such a beautiful thing to do. It was obviously a fantastic bit of landscape as well that they, that wasn't ruined by this road churning up and going straight through it. So it was a win-win situation, really.
Now, we talked about people that have disrupted their homes and upset the fae in some way. They've disrupted the energies. Now, we had Maria Wheatley, who was talking about ley lines with us a few months back. And I'm just wondering, is there any connection between the fae and ley lines? For instance, if people are digging up their gardens and things like that, it somehow might upset the ley line. Could it be a bit of a misinterpretation, maybe, that they're digging up something that's been put there by the fae or a fae energy?
Yeah, I think so. I've got a vague recollection that's very, very similar to the road one where there was a diversion. I think it must have been in Ireland. And it wasn't just to do with the fae, it was to do with an energetic line that was running through. So the theory is, and again, it's not something that I've experienced firsthand, is that, ley lines create the highways and byways on a spiritual level energetically for both fae and for disincarnate energies as well. So, again, it's things like rivers and streams can create that. So if you're blocking or stopping those kind of things, so you're blocking and stopping an energy, and fae really genuinely don't like that. I mean, if you've got a line of energy coming through your property, and fae have used that as a highway for since the dawn of time, and you plonk a house there, then I think you've got to expect the highways and byways of the spiritual world, coming through your property at all times.
Yeah. Now, it's interesting because there's lots of, over the past 20, 30 years, there's lots of these fairy festivals springing up around the country, particularly America. I've been to a few out there myself, selling artwork, and also around the UK. Why do you think there's such a resurgence of an interest in the fairy world?
Well, like you, I did many years on the circuit of the British Fae festivals, and they are beautiful things. It's just such a lovely vibe in terms of festivals. I've been to all kinds of festivals, and fairy festivals have definitely got a super friendly atmosphere and some lovely creative people. But I think it's to do with the resurgence is to do with our awareness of the environment, and fairies definitely much play into that. That we're wanting to get back to a way of living that's not so complicated, and that's more in tune naturally. There's a lot of people wanting that, but it's also that the energy that it brings is a very creative energy. I mean, you yourself know through your painting and your artwork. I mean, one of the theories is that we gain inspiration out of the blue, and that may be from the fae. These sparks of ideas that we often wonder, where did that come from? It's so I think that's the basis for it. The backbone of it is the creativity and the love of nature and wanting to get back there.
Did you ever go to the Capel Manor one in sort of North London area?
I didn't know. I've not been to any of the London ones. I kind of avoid cities. I'm a bit of a country bumpkin at heart, I think.
That was a really good one. In fact, although I say North London, it was Capel Manor is actually a horticultural college. So it's set in the grounds of a big mansion, really beautiful gardens. Like the whole point of it is kind of a place for people to learn about gardening and horticulture. But they used to do this fairy festival. It's fantastic. They had Caribbean music, Caribbean food. They had lots of arty things. Everything was colourful and rainbows, and it's absolutely fantastic. I loved it, and I was gutted that they stopped doing it. Yeah, I love the fairy festivals, and of course with lockdown, basically nothing's going on. So
I know.
I'm really hoping something next year will kick off of that nature.
Yeah, I think there'll be lots that will sort of spring up again. There was lots of a couple of years ago. There were lots of villages that took on the theme. I'd gone out to a few of what they thought were going to be very, very small fairy festivals, sort of fairy themed festivals, just sort of no payment to get in, that kind of thing. And I remember going to one. I think it was up Chesham Way actually. It wasn't that far from Aylesbury. And it was absolutely throng. They couldn't handle the numbers. They couldn't handle the amount of cars that were going to it. They couldn't, it was catering was running out. It wasn't just people taking children. There were adults that were fully immersed in it. It was quite a spectacular day, really. The day that I went, and I think that's another thing as well. It's that letting go and that being able to. I mean, fairy festivals are very big on sort of dressing up in whatever you believe fate to be, and it's living in that kind of moment of just enjoyment. And that's another thing with the fairy. I mean, we've just had the solstice gone, and that idea of being playful and just letting go and dancing and being in the moment is something that we all desperately need in today's times. And the fairy world definitely gives us that option and that opportunity.
I once went to a fairy festival in Pennsylvania. I can't think what they call it. I don't know, Glen Rock Fairy Festival, something like that, maybe. And I remember it was a 3-day thing, and I was allowed what they call a booth or a pitch. Over here we call them stalls. But it's outside. I really don't like doing these things outside because the elements are always against you. But it was a lovely setting. It was nice river and things like that. But as it got progressively windier and stuff like that, it was like thinking, I don't know if this is going to really stand this kind of weather of blowing gales and stuff. And the next day we weren't really allowed to take our booths or pitches down. We just had to keep them there. So I'd kind of cover up all my stuff with like a big velvet blanket type of thing to protect it, and that was it basically. And then I'd come in the next day at like 8 o'clock. I was the only person there asking for a cup of tea in the morning. Everybody else was having coffee. It was quite bizarre. I remember the guy saying, he was running the coffee booth, says, out of the 20,000 people that I've been serving here, you're the only guy that's been drinking tea. I said,
I'm British, dear boy.
I'm British, dear boy, and I'm wearing a fairy kilt. Half my stuff had blown down this creek, unfortunately. I was slightly peed off at that. And then it got so gusty that part of a tree, I think it must be like a dead piece of branch, that fell onto this poor guy. I didn't actually see it happen, but I kind of heard about it. And they had to go and get an ambulance to take the guy to hospital. And you kind of think about it retrospectively and thinking, well, what did we piss off the fairies for there? There we are, honouring them, celebrating them, and nature bit our ass, basically, as the Americans might say. So, it was just a bit of an odd one that this poor guy ended up having to go to the hospital, probably obviously having to pay for it as well. You go out there celebrating fairies, and the fairies are throwing big twigs down on him or something like that.
Yeah,
I mean, you can get some buggers though, can't you?
Yeah, definitely. And it sounds particularly unfair, seeing as how you, like you say, you are there honouring them, and there they go, like throwing something at you. It's maybe they wanted to say, actually, we are here. Maybe it was one of those. You're all celebrating us, but none of you are actually interacting with us right now.
Now, most fairies, I don't know if they have time scales and things like that, but I remember reading in this book, I think it was Colin Wilson's The Occult or The Paranormal, something like that, Mammoth Book of the Paranormal or Mammoth Book of the Occult. Huge biblical thick book, and I thought, wow, I'm going to read this. And I remember reading in the very introduction pages, I don't know if he lives there still, but I remember him saying he went to visit or stay with a lady who was a witch somewhere in Devon somewhere, and she said, would you like to see a gnome? And he goes, yeah, sure. So she said, right, you've got to get up really early next morning, 4:30 in the morning. And she took him to this place where a stream was, somewhere near her house, presumably countryside dwelling, something like that. And he said he saw this little gnome creature washing his brightly coloured socks. It sounds crazy, but I know you do crazy, so we're going to go.
Yep.
he was washing his brightly coloured socks. I think it was like luminescent green and red, something like that. Washing his socks in this stream, and he'd be wringing them out, this little chap, and then going on his merry way at 4:30 in the morning. So he obviously had an early start, but yeah, just very, very strange, isn't it? I mean, this is why I say they have their own time things. They don't get up same time as us. They're up at 4:30 in the morning, and the first task they've got to do is wash their socks. They've only got one pair. You know.
I think the thing is with time, I always love the idea of the betwixt between. So at that time in the morning, you would have it's between times, isn't it? So that's when you're meant to be able to see, actually physically see the Fae, which is, you know, early dawn or at dusk or at certain times in the year. You know, we've had, like I say, we've had solstice, and that's a magical time when the veil's thin. Then you've got Samhain, which, you know, that's another magical time when the veils are thin as well. So maybe it wasn't, you know, maybe he wasn't particularly best pleased about getting up at that time, but maybe that's the time when he was actually in physical form to wash his socks, you know. Maybe he was, you know, quite grumpy about having to do that. Who knows?
Well, you see, that's an interesting aspect, because you think, well, hang on, why would a being that goes on to another dimension have to physically wash their socks? But maybe when they come into this world, they have to come in with all the rubbish that goes with it, and that is dirt and germs and God knows what else. And they will only come in for a little bit, like a deep sea diver will only go into the ocean for maybe half an hour before his air runs out. They can only dip their toes into our world for a little bit. But they are part and parcel of the rules and regulations and of our reality, and then they disappear out of it again. But I suppose whilst they're here, they're taking advantage of the elements, you know, and maybe they do it as a ritual of some sort as well. You know, it's not just literally physically cleaning their socks. Maybe it's there as something to do with the river, the flow of energy of water or something like that. Maybe it's a symbolic gesture in some way. I don't know. But
maybe it's to do with anchoring their energy within the world, but that they do something that's a mundane task that kind of grounds them. And I don't know. I've never really thought about it. It's a really interesting one, you know. And like you say, the energy of the river would definitely contribute to their feeling a part of the landscape and the land.
Well, if you think of people like John the Baptist baptizing people in rivers, anointing them with the power of blessing of God by chucking a load of water on them, and water's used a lot in these rituals anyway. Holy water, it's meant to be cleansing in some sort of form. So maybe, like I say, there's a sense of ritual or something to do with that. It's not literally just washing his socks, although the perception of the people visiting him might just see it in that way, but there could be a whole lot more to it. You know, I expect if we met the gnome today and we said, yeah, is it highly symbolic ritual? He goes, nah, I'm just washing my socks. You know.
Yeah, that's more than likely. That's more than likely to happen.
So what other weird encounters have you had?
So two of them that I can talk to you about only sort of transpired that they were Fae related, sort of as recently, excuse me, as last summer. When I started reading about modern encounters, although I do understand the rich tapestry that we have in folklore and sort of past encounters historically, I'm really interested in sort of more modern encounters and theories of the Fae, because I felt like I was mad for a long time, you know, going slightly doolally with it all. So I was reading one particular encounter, and apparently it's quite a regular encounter that people don't actually attribute to the Fae. Most people, when you think about hearing the Fae, you think about hearing song, or you think about hearing bells or magical music. But one of the ways that people will know that the Fae are around, and especially this occurs in woodlands, sometimes in meadows, I've read accounts of in meadows, but majority of the time is in woodlands, is the sound of a jumbo swarm of bees, like a mass swarm of bees, but with absolutely no evidence of any flying insects around. And I, over the last couple of years, probably about 3 years, going into woodlands, had been baffled by this. So I'd be walking in woodlands with somebody, and I would genuinely think that we were going to be bombarded by bees making an incredible racket, and feeling like it was feet above my head, and looking around and thinking there's got to be a swarm somewhere on one of these trees. But the telling thing is, whoever I've been walking with and that's occurred, they can't hear it. no matter how I've kind of ranted and raved at them, going, please listen harder. You know, how can you not hear that? It's almost deafening, and it's a crazy. And when I read that, it was like, oh, that's what it is. And the theories behind it are that when you start, it's like with any kind of upping of your psychic ability, when you start recognizing things, whether it be spirit or whether it be fae, you start sort of putting out a different light into the world, and you become a beacon, and then these things become really attracted to, oh, that person, that you're obviously shining some kind of different light when you're out in these environments. That must have happened over the last few years, probably 4 or 5 times, where it's and every time, like I say, I've looked like a complete nutter to a friend who I've been walking with, going, please tell me you've heard that, So that was one of them. Go on, sorry, Andy.
I was going to say, have you heard of any kind of fae interactions within completely unnatural settings, like maybe in a school or a hospital or office blocks or anything like that?
Yeah, quite a lot. And I think, intriguingly, over the last year, the paranormal community have really picked up on this and are quite warm into the fact that not everything that they encounter while they're out on investigation is of a human nature or demonic nature. That there is a slow resurgence into interest in it. And I have had quite a lot of paranormal investigators say, what they've encountered doesn't fit the boxes anymore. And they're starting to see things very, very differently and sort of open their minds to what's going on. So, yeah, very much in urban environments. I mean, there's even accounts of people having really beautiful encounters in urban environments where people have really tried to make small spaces very beautiful. So they've had, a flower box that they really loved tending to, because it's their only bit of sort of garden space that they have, and they've had small encounters of a fae nature. So I don't think it's particularly restricted to wild natural environments. I think the planet's the planet, isn't it? So I think that they do go all over.
I'm intrigued what you said, that it people in the paranormal, it doesn't tick the boxes anymore. Can you elaborate on that?
I think people are kind of starting to I think one of the things is there has been an advancement in technologies that people take out with them on paranormal investigations. And there's a lot more investigators, I think, especially within England, it's quite a popular thing to happen. And things like even electronic voice phenomena, where people record spirit voices on different devices. That's actually coming back with things that are not particularly human, but don't fit within the demonic category either. So
explain, because I've not come across this, because so far with EVPs and spirit boxes, I've heard human voices and demonic growls. Yeah. What have you heard that's kind of not those things? So
there has been terminology that's come through that's been very fae. So, the question asked, who are you? And the answer back's Pixie, and that's come back on more than one occasion. I mean, you do have to question yourself, is it something, I'm always really skeptical, but not of the evidence. I'm always really skeptical of, if I'm a ghost and I'm a bit bored, I'm kind of going to have some fun, I'm going to play along with it. So there's always that there. But there is particular kind of pitches, whistles, crackles, sort of singing voices that don't really fit the norm within the EVP. Similarly, with I've lost what it's called. The screen with the stickman. It'll come to me where you sort of point the camera. I can't remember this.
Oh yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah. So you basically you filming, but what it's picking up on, it's like a Nintendo Connect type thing where it will pick up on different shapes and show it in a stick figure form. So what's happening with that is there are a lot of snippets of evidence of people going out and picking up beings that are either incredibly small, incredibly misshaped, or incredibly tall. And I know, again, this is down to interpretation. I've seen these devices, pick up a chair leg and then pick up a bit of a curtain, and it kind of maps something out. But there has been incidents where I have been around these devices and there is no real explanation, and there's other things that come along that kind of back up that evidence, the temperature drops, that kind of thing. DVPs, direct voice phenomena, that goes off at the same time as well. So I don't know why people are opening up more to it. I do love the fact that people are opening up more to it. I think ultimately it can only be a good thing. I think a lot of the time when people struggle with paranormal activity, they don't want it. They don't want their house being sort of sabotaged and them being sabotaged, and they want a way to be able to live in harmony again. And the more that we can recognise that there may be other things at play, and we have to deal with them very differently to spirit. I think the more we're going to be productive in helping people and helping, not just spirit but fae. We've always got to see that side of it as well. So, yeah, I think it's definitely a positive shift forward.
I've always had a theory that the mythology around fae, or especially fairies, is these kind of tiny little Tinkerbells flittering about. Mm-hmm. I've always kind of wondered, well, within the paranormal community, people are seeing orbs all the time, mm-hmm. little fluffy kind of, bits of light flickering here, there and everywhere. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if, going way back, Middle Ages or even before then, maybe people were seeing orbs, these little kind of wisps of light and these little flicks of light, and kind of just creating the mythology of fairies around that. But of course, they are a real thing. They do exist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, there's the marsh lights, Will-o' the Wisp, that's got a very fae type of name, and prior to the word poltergeist, historically those kind of activities in the house would have been put down to a house brownie or something of those lights that needs to be appeased. So doors slamming, things being thrown around, objects being balanced would not have been called a poltergeist, because that terminology and that theory was not in existence. So a lot of things that do go on that are outside seeing an actual ghost weren't attributed to spirit, they were attributed to fae. And it's only, I would say just past the Victorian era that we start, with the rise of spiritualism, that we start thinking that everything is to do with human spirit energy.
When do you think
we're living in? Go on, carry on, Andy.
Well, when did the terminology of poltergeist actually come into the vernacular?
I don't know exactly. I know it's definitely a modern term. I don't know. I would take a plump at probably the 1930s, but that is an absolute stab in the dark. But
noisy ghost, is it German for noisy ghost?
Yes, it's noisy ghost. Yeah, it means noisy ghost.
Yeah. So, well, I'd imagine it's interesting why the term came from Germany rather than anywhere else. So maybe they were investigating them or had problems with them anyway. But Germany being right next to the Scandinavian countries anyway, where they have a strong belief in these things, maybe they're more in tune with that thing than we were over here, sort of thing. What was the other encounter you had, Kate, or have we covered those? I'm not sure.
I think there's a last one again. It didn't come to light until I've been doing some modern research into fae, and it's I think it's the one that probably makes me sound like a crackpot above all others. It's a real lunatic story. But I had friends who lived in Rotterdam, and I've been doing a lot of travelling backwards and forwards over a couple of years while they were spending time out there. I did a lot of travelling on my own on an aeroplane, and it's a short journey. It's not a bad journey. And one particular time I was coming back on the plane, and I think we were probably at the highest we could go for that flight. And something caught my eye out the window. It was a very clear middle of the day. We're above the clouds, and I originally thought that this was some kind of when you get floaters in your eyes and you get that kind of shape. This thing it was transparent. But you could see through it, but it was literally just a trail, and then a sort of a darker grey what I would assume is a head. And I did watch it, and then I realised it wasn't an optical thing that was playing on my actual physical eye, and I ruled out the fact that there was nothing on the window. And I watched this thing. It must have been a good probably between 8 and 10 minutes, and it was a long distance away. And it was sort of going up and down in patterns, and sort of it looked like it was swimming. And it wasn't until a plane went by it that I realised the hugeness of this thing. And it must have been the length of three planes from what I could gather from the distance. And I was in one of those, there's no way this is happening. There's no way I'm seeing this thing moment. So I'm looking around to the person who's sat next to me, and they're asleep. So I turned round to the guy who was behind me, who also had a window seat. And all I said to him was, "Can you see that?" And he just went, "Yeah." And that was it. Nothing else was ever said. And I never really understood what that was. I'm not that au fait with sort of UFO stuff and ufology. And reading that book, there was a description in it that I was so pleased that I found it, because the description was, and it was under the heading of dragons. And to me, instantly, this encounter that this other person had was very, very similar. And I just thought, yes, that is dragon energy, and we do see, dragons again sort of going to the realms of creatures and outside the realms of fae. And then here it is, it's that energetic being, it's not something that's solid form. It's got no scales. It's got no defined face. There's no fire. There's no gold. It's just this thing that's in the air, and it's this collective energy within the air. So, yeah, like you say, I think that's probably the top of the list of the mad encounters that I've had.
It reminds me a bit of Trevor James Constable. I don't know if you're familiar with that name at all.
No.
Okay, he was a guy that was, I think he was from New Zealand, if memory serves me correct, but in the 1960s and 70s, could have been the 1950s, he was out in the various deserts with infrared film or filters over his camera, photographing what he was saying, biological entities in the sky, that only when he was, using the red filter or something, he would pick them up. And he said that other people there photographing the same things, and even people, I think a separate load of researchers were kind of discovering the same thing, and I think it might have been from Portugal, if memory serves me correct. We had a chap called Nick Hayes. He's actually been on the Paranormal UK Radio Network talking to other show hosts about his research, but I've met Nick quite a few times now, and he's done similar research. He's taken where Trevor James Constable left it a little bit. Obviously, he left it in the world of film. Nick has had a specially adaptable camera, digital camera, which he's been filming strange critters or whatever you want to call it, flying over his house in Oxfordshire.
Wow.
What was that?
Sorry, my door.
Oh, okay. The dog's back. Okay.
Yeah, the dog's back.
The shape-shifting werewolf is back. Strange critters are being sighted above his house, and they can only be photographed, and I think Nick was photographing in the ultraviolet and also the infrared as well.
Wow.
So what you're suggesting you saw out the window, and it was spotted by the guy behind you, you might have possibly, because you're a high altitude, maybe I do know that when you fly higher in the sky, you're more exposed to radiation. Because it's not getting filtered through our atmosphere or something. So you're more actually, pilots especially, because they're flying day in, day out, are actually getting more toxic radiation poisoning than, say, me or you. But it's possible that you might have encountered something like what Nick and Trevor James Constable had been seeing or photographing. And it could be just the right time of day. You happen to catch a faint glimpse of it, but maybe if you had an infrared camera or an ultraviolet camera, you might have picked up more of it, perhaps. It could be these things could be attracted to the planes, and they fly along with them. Maybe they're trying to mate with them or something.
So what were their theories about what it is? Did they discuss that?
Well, I mean, obviously a lot of people are trying to shoot them down over it. But basically, they were basically coming up with ideas that these biological UFOs, if you like. Now, I know people associate UFOs with aluminium flying machines or something like that, you know. But they're saying that these particular unidentified flying objects are biological entities that seem to inhabit our world outside of our range of frequency of perception. And so therefore you need certain gadgets and gizmos to see them. And they, you know, you have to filter it through the wave of light, because remember, obviously, you would know this anyway, but, you know, for people that don't, we only see a small spectrum of the wavelength, you know, and there's many more spectrums of infrared, gamma, ultraviolet, etc., of various forms of light. I mean, one scientist said it's picture yourself as the whole matter of the universe and the spectrum of the universe. We are just one thin slither of paint on the floor, and this universe is a sky-rise skyscraper of different floors, and our perception is literally just a thin sliver of paint in that analogy. So there's many more floors of this skyscraper of reality, and occasionally we can picture someone walking around our floor, or occasionally we might see someone through the doorway.
Yeah.
And that's possibly what Trevor James Constable and Nick Hayes and others are capturing, and people like yourselves are capturing EVPs and seeing certain things. And either they're biological, but they seem to inhabit or co-inhabit our world to a certain frequency. And like you say, they're much closer. So maybe fairies or the Fae Kingdom are within those realms as well. I mean, Nick has photographed not just creatures floating in the sky. He's photographed things sitting in his shed and stuff like that.
Wow.
Neil, have you seen that program with Danny Dyer, that UFO one?
Yes.
Now, he, at the very end, he was pretty gobsmacked, and I think the group he was with were pretty gobsmacked, because he went out in the desert in America. Again, it's always America for some reason. But they looked with the naked eye, and they couldn't really see much. They got out their infrared cameras, and suddenly they saw all these things whizzing around all over the sky, and even kind of like slowly going into a mountain at one point.
Yeah, flying triangles and everything.
That's it, yeah.
Yeah, and he was fucking out. You know,
Diamond, mate, diamond.
Yeah, that's right. It's nice to send a Cockney East Ender out there to America to investigate UFOs. It kind of really sets the palette and tone of our investigations over here. You know? God, what do they think we are? You know.
Bless him.
So basically, so there could be stuff flying over our heads all the time, and we're just not aware of it. And it's like ghosts, you know, spirits can see us, but we can't see them. So what you saw on that flight suggests to me, because you're at a certain height anyway, that these things were maybe in the upper atmosphere. Trevor James Constable, this pioneer of this research, he certainly suggested these things were mostly in the upper atmosphere, but occasionally they could be drawn down using something like what they call a cloud buster, which was a tube-like thing that if you pointed it up at clouds, for some reason, clouds would be drawn to this tube. I'm not saying it's sucked into it, but for some reason, William Heinemann, name of cloud buster, the guy that invented it. But why you'd want to invent a cloud buster, I don't know, to bust clouds, I don't know. But this guy invented it. And if you think of a large cannon type of structure, but maybe lots of different tubes coming away, it looks like something out of a Star Wars type of contraption. But, you know, Nick was using this same contraption. He built his cloud buster out of I think it was a discarded drain pipe or something, and he had cut them all off to different lengths. And then he had pointed at a degree of 45 degrees, pointing up at the sky. And this would somehow draw these entities to come and investigate the cloud buster. It's a bit like they were curious. So he wasn't there really cloud busting or trying to make the rain happen or anything like that. He just set this up merely as bait, if you like, you know. Chum for a shark or whatever, and then these things would come through, and he would spend all day photographing these things on his video camera. And the thing is, he started to get followed and investigated because of what he was doing. People started to sort of for instance, his camera was held up at customs in America because he had to send his camera away to get tweaked and that, so that it would register ultraviolet and infrared. And it was held up in customs. They wanted to know why he was doing it. They maybe thought he was a spy, or they wanted to know what he was filming, you know, what's all this weird stuff you're filming type thing. They still might be observing them. I don't know, but it's an interesting thing. I just thought I'd mention it because it kind of tied in what you experienced there. So again, this whole world of Fae could extend into these things that have been seen in the desert by Trevor James Constable. We talk about these things are probably in the woods, but hey, they might be in the desert as well. We just don't know. And even above the sea, who knows? They could be above the sea. You mentioned mermaids, and you say they're not part of the fairy kingdom.
For me, they're not. No, I like I say, I apologise to the rest of the human Fae community for that. But yeah,
are we discounting Nessie as well? I take it.
Oh bless! No, I don't think Nessie's Fae.
She's famous.
Famous, definitely.
Yeah. So where do you go next? What's your next project on your agenda?
I am going to be starting to do some small podcasts, particularly around Fae, talking to different people from different angles. So I'm looking at people at the moment, inviting people in for just sort of half-hour chats about it, really, because it's something that I want to expand out into different areas, just to get people aware in the paranormal community, particularly. It's interesting that you were saying about the cloud busting equipment. What always comes to my mind is, we have a plethora of equipment when it comes to the paranormal world. Are we missing a trick with the Fae world? Are we missing, looking at equipment that we could actually go fairy hunting with, which I think would be a particularly cool title to have as a fairy hunter. And I'm wondering, if drain pipes can attract dragons, then what can we do to attract the Fae?
Well, maybe, yeah. I mean, maybe after the end of every kind of cloud busting session, you tip it out and like 10 fairies drop out of it into jars that you sell in Glastonbury.
I reckon glitter will attract them.
Definitely.
Well, any books or any other things you got? Any appearances, maybe? I mean, after lockdown is over, is there any projected appearances you hope to do?
So there was lots of things on the agenda this year that unfortunately haven't taken place. I was meant to be talking at a couple of conventions, and of course with the lockdown that hasn't happened. As part of my work with the Ghost Founded Paranormal Society, we had lots of things planned. They've all been on hold, which is a shame. I have got what I've recently entitled a Mirandering journal on the go. That's kind of going to be sort of all the weird and wonderful accounts that I've experienced. So that's still definitely in the pipeline. I was asked on Friday on another American podcast. They were desperate for me to write a book, and I said, you're going to have to give me a bit of time on that one. I haven't got a book out already. I've done bits and bobs of writing for Haunted Magazine, which is a really good British paranormal magazine that comes out with lots of different writers from the field within that. So, but yeah, I'm kind of after lockdown, I'm always curious about what's out there and what to experience, and anybody who fancies collaborating or going out and doing stuff, then I am a curious person and up for most things within the paranormal realm.
Okay, and how can people contact you?
So I'm on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram, and if you type in Kate Hair Girl, as in Bunny Rabbit Girl, but not Bunny Rabbit, but as in hair, Ray, then I come straight up.
Okay, so you're looking maybe for potential leads, information, collaborations, research projects, that kind of thing, and obviously invites to America and all the lovely tours that you could do there, and
that'd be perfect.
And any cloud busting workshops will be on the periphery, but
yes, definitely. And fairy hunting, I might just go out fairy hunting.
But no more flights to Rotterdam or Amsterdam, and
unfortunately not. No, unfortunately. It's with that particular story. People go, "Oh, did you go through Amsterdam to get the flight back?" And then they raise an eyebrow on that, and it's like it wasn't that kind of trip.
Actually, the interesting thing that skeptics would point out just before we draw to a close, because you mentioned interestingly about the epilepsy, the temporal lobe epilepsy, and it doesn't cause a fit as such, but it sends you into a bit of a trance-like state, I'd imagine.
Yes. Yeah.
Would a lot of skeptics or a lot of people that are saying, well, you're seeing these things because of your temporal lobe epilepsy, what would you say to that?
I'll say absolutely. I think that's a massive part of it, but I don't think that that's something that discounts the validity of it. I mean, it's a weird and wonderful thing, and it's something that's very difficult to describe. But one of the ways that I described having those seizures when they first started happening was like living in a 2D reality where you could touch the sky. You know, it had that very kind of, I would say, trippy kind of quality to it. I think the thing for me is, I think that probably one of the theories is that if it is a theory, and it's one that I've come across. It's called ascension sickness. If you kind of, you know, start really working hard at sort of spiritual and psychic work, it can be something that your mind actually gets blown by it. So there's that side of it as well. And I think it probably did open a lot more doors for me going through that. It's absolutely medicated, under control, and has been for quite a fair few years now. It's the verification that I get after it. It's the verification where I'm feeding back information to people who I couldn't have got that information from anywhere else other than, you know, from that sort of psychic arena, really. But yeah, I think, you know, people can be skeptical about it. I do have a feeling that it has got spiritual links. What that is, I really don't know. But I'm very aware of the effects that it can have, and how that would lead to people sort of discounting or maybe disbelieving some of the things that have come from that.
I guess it's a case of people, when they see it, they believe it, kind of thing. You know, that they can poo-poo it, but if they're confronted by it in their life, then there's not much they can do.
Definitely.
That's it, absolutely. Right, I think that's it, ladies and gents. So thank you, Kate, for joining us on the Paranormal Peep Show on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Andy, any last words?
Just can't wait for the lockdown to end. I want to get back to life. I want to go on my ghost walks and my ghost hunts. And there was one particular one that was being planned with Kate, actually, at an old school in Hitchin. A very kind of Victorian haunted school. That's been put on hold, so thanks a lot, coronavirus, for that. So hopefully, Kate, I might be able to see you maybe in the new year.
I think
doubt it's going to happen for this year.
Well, fingers crossed. Let's put out the hope there that we'll get back to it before then.
Yeah.
So long as the ghosts keep 2 meters apart, you'll be fine. All right. Thank you very much indeed, everyone, for listening, and join us next time on the Paranormal Peep Show. Stay safe, stay 2 meters apart, and keep away from the Fae. Okay. Yeah. Cheers, everyone. Good night.
See you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.